Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. This podcast is for and about women of colour and our relationship with nature. Hosted by me, Cherie Mack. The Earth, Sea, Love podcast is committed to exploring the experiences of women of colour with Mother Nature. We want to provide spaces where the hidden voices in the environmental and conservation conversations can explore their relationship with the natural world. Inspired by our time spent outdoors, we amplify the voices of women of colour, our stories, our conversations, interviews, photography, writing, and artwork. We'll be exploring our legacies, histories, and memories which have had an influence and effect upon how we perceive ourselves within the natural world and within the environmental and climate justice movements. Welcome to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. The Earth, Sea, Love podcast has been made possible by the funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund. Thank you. Hey. Welcome back to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. And it's good to have your ears again. I hope you're keeping well as we enter December 2020. My life, where has this year gone? Days are getting shorter and colder, but there's still a lot of joy and gratitude to be had about the lives that we're living now. And that's all we can do or control, or not even try to control, just be in the now, I say. And I'm definitely practicing this more and more, and I think that's what 2020 has brought me, that space and time to slow down, to definitely slow down, to appreciate what I have in my life, and also just to be here now. Because when I am in these moments now, I'm happy, there's joy. And isn't that what we all want to achieve in life? I think this is episode 019 with Avni. And Avni I met in Voxer group for writers. It was a writer's studio, and I think for 8 weeks we were focusing on our different writing projects, and this is where I brought the mixed genre memoir to the table, and we were basically accountability buddies, cheerleaders. We shared our progress week by week on how we were getting on with our projects. Avni during this time was working on her website, some copy, but she was also working on a workshop, offering a course that she was and is working on expanding now. And this was working with loss and where it is and where we can locate it within our bodies. And she mentions this within this episode. And we also explore the healthcare profession, because this is where Avni works, working with the body. and how much wisdom our bodies carry with us on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment sort of thing. And it's a really interesting conversation we have around cold water swimming, the changing seasons, how, becoming elders and moving into our crone phase, and also how Black women's bodies in society, especially in this white supremacy culture, how our bodies weather much more quicker and deeper than in comparison to any other body, white or black. And this is down to the systematic racism that we live under. And I think that's why it's really important that as Black women, we lean into those practices, those tools and skills that we have acquired through life that fosters self-care and self-love. Because that is, for me, the source of everything. If I've got my self-care, self-love, self-acceptance in place, that means that everyone benefits, because I move through the world as a happier being, as a more, not just happy, but more, I'm showing up into the world and I'm showing my best face, my best version of me. And if that is the case, that means everyone benefits. And I see it as my responsibility while living in society, living in community, and of being service to others, that I have got my self-care, self-love, self-acceptance in place. And I'm feeding it. I'm feeding it moment to moment. And that's my responsibility. I'm not asking anyone else to offer up love to me, to care for me. I mean, if you want to, fair enough, I'll accept it. But no longer am I wasting time and energy looking elsewhere for that love, that care, that acceptance, because I've realised I've hit the jackpot in coming to this realisation that it just comes from me. It has to come from me. And then once it comes from me, it flows out and everyone benefits. Anyway, so sit back. I say that every time, right? But you don't sit back. Everybody listens to podcasts doing different things. Oh, and I'd be really interested to find out when you're listening to the Earthly Love podcast, what are you doing at the same time? I like to listen to podcasts. I can't listen to the Earthly Love podcast and do anything else, because usually when I'm listening to the Earthly Love podcast, I'm editing it, listening back for the ums and the ers, and you know what I mean? Like, so many. And I seem to have a sniff and a snook that goes on anyhow. But when I'm listening to other people's podcasts, or I'm usually cooking, say. So when we come to the end of the season and have a break, I am so looking forward to listening back to the episodes of the Earthly Love podcast and being reminded of the journey that we've been on, the wisdom that these wonderful women have shared with us all. And also, I'll be releasing sections or tidbits or sound bites from, the whole array of episodes as a reminder and keep us in your ears while we have a break. But more about that in episodes to come before we go on a break. Anyhow, enough of me rambling on again. Here I was trying to make them short. And I'll see you in the conversation that is coming up with Avni. Enjoy. And thanks for listening. Welcome, Avni. to the Earthsea Love podcast. Thank you so much for being here and agreeing to be a guest on the podcast and have a conversation with me. So thank you kindly.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I usually ask just everyone, where are you in the world and what can you see outside your window? Can you see anything nature-like outside your window?
I'm in North London, and when I look outside, I can see a fig tree and an apple tree and a pear tree. Most of those trees are from my neighbour's garden. I'm lucky to have lots of, for a London home, a lot of green space.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how have you been keeping during these turbulent and difficult times, not just with the pandemic, but then stuff that's been going on around the world with Black Lives Matter and easing of lockdown, maybe not. How you been feeling, how you been looking after yourself is important.
I've felt every single emotion I think that it's possible to feel, and at times I've had really good rhythms of being outside every day and making sure I'm cooking a lot and things like that. And then other times where I want to do the opposite. And so I felt good and I felt overwhelmed, and it feels like things are changing on so many levels. Just, the way that I see the world, the way the world is, all of that stuff. So it's not surprising that it brings up so much stuff.
Yeah, I hear you about feeling all the emotions, and I think there was a time where I wouldn't allow myself to feel all the emotions, and I think that was out of fear and the fear of the unknown and how far would it go and would I be able to cope with it. And I think the times that we've gone through and continue to going through has made me feel that we are able to cope or adapt or be resilient, etc., etc. So what do you do for, in your tagline on your email, you have osteopath and zero balancer. And then there's a subheading, conscious wellness in a modern world. What do you actually do, and how does conscious wellness look like in this modern world?
I'm mainly a body worker, so I work hands-on with touch to help people figure out what's going on. So sometimes it's a symptom that's making them feel uncomfortable. I work a lot with women through pregnancy, so it's kind of through all the different stages. And conscious wellness to me is handing the kind of autonomy back to the person. So I don't really buy into this thing of the person with the degrees is the expert of your body. Like, your body, you're the one living in your body. So consciousness to me is helping people to connect back again with their body and make choices that work for them. Because, whether it's nutrition or exercise or sleep, like, we're all different, but there's all these rules that, we should be drinking 2 liters of water and we should sleep for 8 hours. And I just don't buy into that.
That's really interesting. A number of questions that came up there is like, okay, you work, it's body work and it's about touch. So how has that changed recently, your work? Because we haven't been allowed to get close up to people and touch. How has that worked out for you?
Well, I had months of lockdown of not seeing hands-on clients, which was really weird because I've got so much of my identity is what I do for a living. So it's really meant stepping away from that for some time. And what's been interesting is, even though there's the whole masks and disinfecting and all of that to make it safe when I'm treating, when I actually put my hands on somebody, that feels so normal. So there's the physical distance and keeping apart from one another, but the hands-on, I pride myself on how much I can feel and sense in people, and to be able to do that again after so long of not felt so good. And I'd had a few clients who'd literally waited until March to come and see me, and they'd had symptoms that just couldn't get dealt with in that time. So that, it feels like really being in service and having something I can do. So that felt good. But I just fundamentally don't agree that human beings are meant to be so separate from each other. And, you know, it's lovely, like how we're speaking on a screen right now. It's lovely that there can be ways of connection, but there's nothing like that hands-on touch.
You have a podcast which is Speak from the Body, and within there you talk about the wisdom of our bodies, the intelligence of our bodies, and our bodies are not just telling us signals or giving us the idea through our senses of how to be in the world, basically, and also sending out that need that we do need to connect to another body. Thinking about the program of the podcast, how do you see then, or how does nature or a relationship coming to your work, or you personally, with that idea of connecting with another body? Earth is a living, breathing thing.
I think it's the connections of connecting to our breath, our body, our emotions, connecting to one another, connecting to the season, the planets. You know, it can go as kind of microscopic as you want it to be, and to get as big and broad as you want it to be as well. And like, I often think on a cellular level that we're made up of all these billions and trillions of cells, and then they're organized in different systems to form bigger entities. But really, it's just these tiny, tiny cells, and it's almost like a metaphor for how we are as people as well. Like, we're all individual, but we're also all vibrating together as well.
Yeah, I love that, vibrating all together. It's only just like in the last few years have I taken on board that we are like energy, like everything's energy, and how we can be operating on different levels higher. You know, I want to actually try and vibrate higher daily, and I see that as how I am showing up within the world, in a sense. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that vibration, because I would say only since my relationship has developed with nature have I been really conscious. Just in your recent podcast, it's one just with you, and you're talking about water and cold water swimming, and the idea of how, you know, we're made up of water a lot, like 60%, and the idea that how vital a resource water is to us as to live, but then also to have that connection with water in almost going home, going back to the source, I think you've said there. So are you actually developing your relationship with water, or your relationship with nature, or are you bringing it into your work with your clients at all?
I think all of those things. So it comes into my work a lot anyway. So one of the types of practice that I do is cranial osteopathy, which is a really gentle and subtle type of osteopathy, and you can use it a lot with babies and children or pregnant women and things. And the approach, because it's so gentle, you're feeling the fluidity in the body, the real, like, even within a bony structure there's fluidity. And so the analogies about nature and connecting with nature come through a lot. And it's quite interesting how a lot of cranial osteopaths move kind of to the coast. And so they're literally like really being immersed in the sea energy all the time. And often when I'm treating, like, I think of injuries that have kind of gone on for a long time as a stuckness in somebody. So when I'm working hands-on, I'm often thinking of imagery to do with water to bring in more movement and fluidity and shift. So it's very connected. And also, I think with me living in a city, like, I was born in the suburbs. I've always lived in London, but I'm at heart such a nature girl. So I know that I need to keep that connection to nature all the time in different ways.
Yeah, and you know, that leads really nicely on. You're saying you were born in London and brought up in London, and I was going to be asking the idea of, like, have you always had a relationship with nature? I mean, did your parents bring you up with that connection with nature, or has it come later in life for you? I mean, I was just going to say, what is your ancestry, and then, carry on.
Both my parents were born in East Africa, but we're Indian origin. And where my mum talks about growing up near Mount Kilimanjaro and having the kind of view of it. And I don't know how much I've romanticized in my head, but I see it as she grew up in a kind of, in a town or in a city, but with a lot of nature around. And when they talk about stories of, say, traveling from Mombasa to Nairobi in Kenya when they were newlyweds, that wildlife was everywhere and the elephants might be crossing the road, or like very different from now where everything's safely in a game park, and sadly poaching has really culled all these numbers. So yeah, I had a lot of connection. And I think also just coming from a hotter country, there's just much more of outdoor living, and celebrations would be kind of outdoor, like barbecues, and so that's very much in my bones. But we were always taken to places, to parks and everything. But I think as soon as I was old enough to kind of take a bit of independence for myself, I was always looking for wilder nature. So like I was remembering this morning, just prepping for this conversation, that we had these woods nearby, and I wasn't really allowed to go in the woods, where, as you would say to any young child, but I used to just go on my bike and go on my own. And I just loved that kind of peace and quiet in wilder nature, whereas just going to the park that's a bit manicured doesn't have the same feeling.
And that's interesting, because somebody just recently was talking to me about wild and wilder spaces and the wilderness, and how I defined it and how I connected with it, or was that within me, etc., etc. And it was interesting because I was seeing it as, okay, untouched by man, in that sense, but not taking on the connotations of wildness, like, undomesticated or feral, or like the negative connotations. I was actually thinking, like, within these wilder spaces there was serenity and peace and calmness. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that what you were feeling when you branched out alone into these wilder spaces?
Definitely. And I think those spaces are often more harmonious. So like I'm lucky to be able to walk through the Royal to Regent's Park, so one of the royal parks, on my way to work. And it's stunning, it's absolutely beautiful, but it's so heavily manicured. Things are kind of trimmed and shaped a certain way that it just has a different feeling. So I think with wilder spaces, there's that feeling of being in some form of harmony with nature rather than trying to do something to it.
That's interesting. I love those words that you use, harmony and manicured. And then I was just going to say it in a like controlled and contained way. And this is something that is coming up recently with this research that I'm doing with other Black and Asian and ethnic people around our involvement in nature and the natural world, and how nature at the moment is, with the parks and the safari parks, is a commodity, and how it's actually fenced off and then sold back to us as a recreation, as a leisure pursuit sort of thing. And when we were saying it comes down to land and power, what do you think about this? Are we making these generalizations because we feel that we're left out of these spaces, or is there actually some truth in this? What do you think?
That's just prompted twice. It's happened where I've got locked into green spaces, like one because they closed the gates and it was just later. I hadn't intended on being stuck, so I had to scale the gate to get out.
Scale the gate?
Yeah. And the other time was in a really posh part of South Kensington where they've got these garden kind of squares. So if you live in the area, you've got a electronic key.
Yes, I know.
And I just was being a bit naughty on a really nice day and went in to sit and read and didn't realise that everyone else had left and I didn't have a way out. So I had to wait until someone else came in that I could, and she was giving me so much lip for me being in there.
What, like, you're not allowed to be in here? Well, who do you think? Oh my gosh.
And a part of me, because I can be a bit of a quiet rebel, so a part of me was just like, green spaces to me are just where you take off your shoes and socks and you sit on the grass and you are part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that often happens, you know, like say with lockdown, where we were given that, you know, once a day where you're allowed out to exercise. Like that's great if you live somewhere where you've got a park on your doorstep, but so many people don't. So there is this, like you say, this commodity of nature.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good then. It's like, okay, I'm going to continue that line of inquiry then, because I didn't really notice, you know, because there's times that I've had, you know, National Trust membership and English Heritage membership and stuff like that, you know, and I've paid as an annual fee on a monthly direct debit thing to go to these houses with their manicured gardens and stuff like that and go around and, oh yes, this is lovely and that sort of thing. But I'm paying back to the landed gentry that probably got these lands and houses through money from the colonies and empire and slavery. It's like I'm paying double then, isn't it? All right, so just like step back a bit. We were talking about water. You were mentioning when you're working touch, you actually visualize water to aid that fluidity and that flow of energy while you're doing your work. I was wanting to know, what other ways are you being creative for yourself? I mean, because I see that as definitely being creative. And I think during these times, to get those virtual connections with nature for our own well-being has been a godsend for me. So how else are you feeding your creativity? Does this include, have you been doing any cold water swimming yet?
I have. I've been to swim in the ladies' ponds in Hampstead Heath 3 times now.
Oh, yes! Was that in 1 week?
In 2 weeks.
Excellent. Because I heard the advice that you gave on that podcast. You know, you should be going 2 or 3 times a week to acclimatize to the cold. I thought they were really good advice that you did give out. I'd recommend anyone going away. The most recent one, I think it was September the 2nd of your podcast. Because it reminded me of some techniques that I might have been forgetting. So thank you for that. But yes, you've done 3 times, 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I've been doing at the end of my shower, having like a cold 2 minutes at the end. So, and I mean, like, I know you swim in the sea and you swear by it, but I've had like that feeling of I'm going to die, and you know, just having to kind of confront, or feeling my breathing become so painful in cold water. So it's not just an easy thing at all. You know, I've always admired the women that go, and then just never felt like I could be one of those women. So yeah, I don't know how much longer, as the weather starts to turn, that I'll keep going, but I'm so glad I've done it this side of the year and not just waited until next summer.
That is good. And I just asked the question, like, why now? As you're saying, there's a fear that you have a physical reaction by making it hard to breathe with cold water. Why now? That's my question.
Many reasons. I admire, like, I'm really fascinated about aging and becoming an elder. And I grew up with 2 of my grandmas at home, well, both my grandmas at home, and also really influenced by other kind of elder women, grandmothery figures. So I'm fascinated in that stage of life, and also the idea of being a proper crone and everything. That really kind of, I feel like I'm coming into my own as I get older. And so like my next door neighbour, she swims in the ponds all year, and she's just one of those women who she's so visible as an elder woman. You just wouldn't mess with her. She just lives her life. Like, there's certain attitudes that I feel like you can see the links of the habits people have and then who they are. And And also on a practical level, I suffer quite badly with seasonal affective disorder. So as soon as the weather starts to shift, or like it's been really noticeable the last couple of weeks, as soon as it gets even a slightly bit dark in the evening, I feel like the end of the world is coming. And I've got quite a positive disposition, but in my kind of physiology, it just floors me. And considering I live in the UK and it's cold and dark a lot of the year, that's just a bit of a miserable way to be. So I've just been curious if it doesn't have to be as uphill as I make it out to be. So if I can't change the weather, then I can change my reaction.
Yeah. And that's really inspiring, that. And that just shows to me how in touch you are with your own body and your own feelings and how they manifest. And yeah, I say, fair play. And if you can keep it up into some colder weather, then good for you. And if you can't, then you can bank it, because I've done it. I've got it. I've done it, and overcome a fear there. And I liked what you said about the idea of softening into the water. Instead of, because, the natural instinct, cold, shock, is to fight it, in a sense, and go against maybe instincts, or maybe our instincts is it's that flight and fight and that sort of thing. But the idea of softening into the water, I just love that, because then there is that almost, I don't know, a communion, a religious, it's almost... and it goes with the breath. So yeah, so I'm really, really pleased that you've done that. Well done. But yeah, creativity we're talking about. And just before we started recording, you were on about the idea of how you've been changing maybe your working patterns and how you've been treating yourself around that. And I think that's really important, because I know that I've been saying to try and take the lessons from lockdown forward, and the idea of okay, I'd like to work virtually for the rest of the year, to keep safe-ish, but then also to keep that slow downness that I cultivated during lockdown into the rest of the year and the rest of my life. The idea of not having to go, produce, but just to have that slack, slow spaciousness, I think, in each of my days. So how do you feel that you've adapted from what we've come out of, and how you're actually working or treating yourself on this side of the pandemic?
Before we started recording, you were asking if I'm busy, and I was saying to you, I feel that for the first time in a long time, I'm busy at the level I want to be busy, but not in excess, and that feels really good. Because I think when things are so busy and you're in that place of having to go or do, you're not feeling and you're not sensing, and so much of my hands-on work needs me to be sensitive to be able to feel. So I need to be in a place of relaxation. But I mean, I don't know how I ever did it, but once I worked in a clinic where in 5 hours I could see 10 clients. And it, to have a physically demanding job, but also treat a lot of complex cases or more kind of emotionally intense cases, it makes no sense. So having a sense of spaciousness in my day, that's definitely something I want to take forward. And I've had the founder of Zero Balancing, he was in his 50s when he created Zero Balancing, and he's now in his early 90s and still does some teaching. So I've got someone that I aspire to, of actually he came into his own in his kind of later years, and so this idea of just living at burnout all the time just doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I mean, I got out of full-time teaching, there was a lack of creativity, but there was that idea of you were at school
for how many hours, and then you'd go home and do more hours. And it was just like work, and it was never done, and there was no space. So yes, space. Yeah, and I love that idea. The guy who's 90-0 balancing. The question is, in the work that you do you have much contact with people that look like you, Avni?
It's rare, and if they do, they're generally professional, high achieving people. So whenever the conversations about BAME people, which there's been so much conversation in the last few months, it's the thing of they look like me or I identify, but then there's a whole socioeconomic, educational status, all of that side of things where it doesn't apply. So like say I do a lot of work to do with maternity services, and Black women are known to be 5 times more likely to die during childbirth or late pregnancy or early motherhood. And the Black women that I treat tend to be lawyers or work in finance, or, you know, it's, well, I mean, in terms of statistics, they can still be as poor, but at least they're the women that know that they can come and choose their healthcare provider, or that they know they can educate themselves about the birth process, or so yeah. So it's a rarer thing, and lockdown has been, with everything happening so intertwined between COVID and Black Lives Matter, and it's really brought up for me of this model of working in healthcare in quite an elite sense, that people have to afford to be able to come and see me, and I work in central London, so fees are higher. That doesn't feel so good anymore, because actually we all deserve to feel healthy, and there's huge swathes of society that are not getting proper messaging.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because even as a Black woman who's had 2 successful pregnancies, and touch wood, really didn't have any trouble within the medical profession, not really on the scheme of things, it is only now that I am seeing the reality. I know I was going to say the statistics, but it's that those are the numbers, but the reality of the number of Black women who either die in childbirth or who lose their children, their babies during birth. And the figures are just like staggering, but they're hidden until now. But it's only through Black women, say like Black Ballard and Black academics, that have shone a light on this. And this isn't just in the USA, it's in the UK as well. And it's just shocking. And what gets me even more is that they put the blame of it upon the individual woman themselves. And, you know, I haven't done the research, but I've read a lot of research. But that isn't the case. And as you mentioned, the women that you might be dealing with, high achievers, professionals, are financially secure probably, but they are also within that risk factor that it could be happening to them, that it could happen to them. Do you know why? Have you got a theory about it? Because I was been reading about the idea of Black women's bodies, how our bodies weather more quickly than other bodies because of what we go through in society, systemic racism, the patriarchy, and how our bodies on a day-to-day basis are worn down. As a body worker, do you see this? Do you believe this? Is this the case?
Is the question of why is there that disparity, or?
Yeah, why is there that disparity?
I mean, from the research, it all points towards structural racism and issues of Black and Asian and other women of colour not being heard. And things like, say, with gynecology, the modern gynecology was founded on experimenting on slave women. So Black women's bodies were never seen as valuable. It was, so that thoughts on pain or just the endurance, all of these things, just the expectation that a black woman would be somehow able to handle everything, all these ideas. So that it's complicated, and it's hard reading. It's there's a brilliant I'll have to give you the name. My memory, that's one lockdown remnant. It's a book called The Big Letdown by Kimberly Allers Seals, and she's a US author, but she's written a book about breastfeeding and the history of breastfeeding and the history of women wet nursing and formula, and how formula can be kind of promoted as a certain status. So if you're becoming more affluent, of course you'd want to be using formula. So things like that. So there, I think there's so many aspects. So I know a black doula called Mars Lord, who's doing a lot of phenomenal work of training up more black doulas, and so that there's more voices and more advocacy and everything. Because even though there are so many women of colour within the NHS, they're working within a patriarchy, aren't they? And like, I've had experiences with, there's a Sri Lankan doctor who comes to mind. The way that she said, "Follow me," was like I would expect a kind of 70-year-old professor to, so there's a certain, like, you're kind of been taught to follow what was done before. So just having more people of colour in the system doesn't answer things.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, thanks for answering that, because it's difficult to talk about, it's difficult to get a handle on, it's difficult to pin it down, but I do see change in the sense of, like, we're having conversations about it, when in the past there hasn't been that space, need or want, or to have these conversations. So thank you for that. Being conscious of time here. But just going back to something that you mentioned about the seasons and how, the changes and how it might be affecting us, the changes in seasons. And we're moving into autumn, my favourite time of year. This is my birth season. I think as individuals, and women especially, we go through different seasons and stages in our lives. You mentioned the Crone, and I'm so glad you mentioned the Crone, because I do believe I'm entering my own Crone period, when I am just not giving a hoot about what anyone says or thinks about me. But I am noticing I'm getting a bit drier, that the water is drying up a little bit. So I know those changes are on. So I'm asking you about what changes are on the horizon for you personally, or you professionally, moving forward. And also if this might tie into what offerings you might have as well through your work.
I'm in a lot of change at the moment. So like I was saying to you before, that all these kind of last few months have really done a 360 on how I think about healthcare and the difference that I want to make and things. So I'm restricting how much one-to-one work I do. So I'm only working Tuesday to Thursday, which feels quite a big shift for me, and keeping 2 days a week where I can put more energy into writing courses and writing generally that I've wanted to do for a long time and had got stuck because I wasn't ever completing things. I run a workshop called Moving Through Loss, and that came about after going through a lot of kind of personal losses, and also just in situations with clients, because so much of when I'm treating is people telling me their stories and starting to question, like I'm a believer in the benefit of therapy, but I think sometimes the things that we experience are not things you can easily talk about, or they're not things that can necessarily be put into words and things. So because I'm a body worker, I'm interested in the body experience of things, so that workshop is experiential and it's in silence, and people just go into their bodies and they get to be with where loss sits in their own body. And we don't always know where that might be. So I'm really proud of that piece of work, and have intentionally also made it accessible. And I'd like to start doing that with different types of groups of people, to make it a wider piece of work. What else? It sounds a bit ironic because so much of my work is in service to people and people orientated, but I actually see this transition, this new season of me being less face to face and less available to people. So it's very much work for humanity that I feel is important, but I feel the need to step away from everyday interaction and content, what's the word? Engagement with people, to just be able to do more meaningful work. Because I think that rhythm of when everyone else is rushing around, you're not really doing deep healing work or work that's meaningful or purposeful. So I'm very much wanting to go into my own space.
So go deeper.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and do you have some techniques or practices or tools that will support you going deeper?
I do a daily of a method that I teach now called the non-linear movement method. And it's really simple. So you're just on your hands and knees with the eyes closed. And at first you just feel whatever you're feeling in your body, whether it's like maybe your knee is feeling a bit sore or your shoulder's a bit achy. And then you just move from that part of your body. And then you start to follow the sensations of what else is going on. And so that's like a kind of meditation, but through movement. And I use that within the moving through loss work that I teach. But it's become a really nice way of unwinding, because when I'm working with clients and I'm hearing their stories, I'm also feeling what's gone on in their body, and often dealing with trauma or disharmony or, you know, dysfunction. So it's a really nice way of just clearing stuff for myself. And then other practices like exercise, meditation, journaling. Over the years, I've learned that I need a certain amount of structure, but a lot of flow. So I don't like being too restrictive about this is how many minutes and this many days. And, you know, there might be some times where I'm meditating every day and I'm doing half an hour a day. And at other times it might be 10 minutes, or other days maybe I'm not meditating. And that seems to suit me. Whereas in the past, some approaches, it's almost like you're being slack if you're not committing. But I just, you know, different days need different things.
Yeah, and I so agree with that. And we actually beat ourselves up if we're not consistently doing it for a certain amount of time each day, rather than listening to our bodies and following that wisdom there that's telling us, get quiet, listen within, sort of thing. Sometimes I need that reminder, that permission. You know, it's like, it's okay, Cherie, if you miss these number of days. When you're ready, you'll be doing it there. So thank you. Can you just tell everyone where they can find out more about you? I mean, I put it in the show notes. You might have something, a special little corner where you've got stuff stashed away.
My website is Avni-Touch, and my Instagram is also Avni Touch, and my podcast is Speak from the Body, and that's from whether it's Spotify or Acast or iTunes, wherever people get their podcasts.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Avni, for agreeing to come on here and speaking with such wisdom. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Cherie.